To just follow on what Jane said, I mean, this is very informal. I guess this is kind of a broad subject. I mean, we're talking about, sort of escaping from COVID in a sort of slowish way, I guess. But kind of really what you're talking about is a big period of change. And this is change perhaps on an unprecedented level, but we get change at various times in our lives and businesses and world as it is. So I kind of view this as an opportunity to sort of rethink a bit. And kind of, obviously you're all doing different things. So, what might be relevant to one might be more or less relevant to someone else. I've put together a few slides, which I think I'm going to whiz through fairly quickly as a sort of aid memoir and sort of stimulate ideas. And I've sort of put them into sort of categories of something around having a clear vision, or at least reviewing what your vision is. Something about, probably not quite important, about, what's the new environment going forward. And, I think we can all see that this isn't going to suddenly end. And whilst there's sort of people are sort of more back at work and more opening up and more trying to get back to normal, clearly, as we all know, and there are lots of restrictions about what one can and can't do, and there's lots of members of the public who are nervous about doing things. And so whatever world you're in, is the trajectory back to normal, I think, is going to be fairly slow. And I think you're seeing big businesses, why you're seeing big businesses announcing redundancies and things as recently as yesterday, because I think they've realised kind of the world isn't going to kick back quite the way they thought it was going to. So there's those sorts of things. So we'll talk a little bit about the environment. Also, the core mantra I have is about what's your business model? How does it work? How do the cogs all fit together? And I think, again, this is a perfect opportunity to actually go back and plot out what your business model is and look at, is it sensible to change it? Does it need to be the same going forward? If there's a benefit out of this period of change, it is an opportunity for people to question things they've done year in, year out, month in, month out, and just say, well, why did we do it like that? So, this is an opportunity. You've seen it in various bits of society, like you've seen the sort of gradual expiration of cash as a means of buying things. It's virtually disappeared, I think, apart from the old parking meter. And nobody would have guessed that 6 months ago that would have happened. I guess people thought cash was going to diminish, but it would probably be over 10 years or 15 years or something. It's actually gone in 6 months, pretty much. So, it was an example of sudden change can cause big change. So a bit about the business model, a bit about business and financial planning. Again, boring subject, not the thing you want to do on a Tuesday mornings, talk about Wednesday morning rather, talk about business planning, but just again comes back to this mantra of it's an opportunity to say, okay, I've got this business model, business plan, what's still relevant, what isn't relevant, and within that a bit about cash and just about thinking about what you spend money on. And then finally, to end on, just again from experience of talking to other organizations, again, it's an opportunity to look at what you use technology for. Do you use technology effectively anyway? Great, that's the case, that's fine. But you might be a business that just about uses email to contact people, doesn't use technology at all for anything else, doesn't have any tools to manage projects, tasks, whatever. Is this an opportunity to look at that as well? So I'm going to whiz through some slides. I'll probably whiz through them reasonably quickly because I don't want this to be boring and slow. So I'm hoping to give you some thoughts and ideas. Obviously, in the space of an hour or so, I can't cover every subject, all of these subjects in lots of detail. So I'm hoping to trigger some thoughts and some suggestions. By all means, Jane will circulate the slides as a reference. By all means, you can drop me an email if you want to, some ideas or conversation. That's fine. So I'm going to share my screen now and see if this works or not. Okay, can everybody see that? Is that, something's gone wrong.
Yeah, we had it just a minute ago.
Did you?
Yeah, so I'll just put my sound on so you can hear me. There we go.
Okay, and everybody can hear me?
Yep, we can, yep. It's just all on.
Okay.
We're all doing thumbs up, you probably couldn't see us.
Okay. So as I said, this is about significant change and about becoming more resilient so that shockwaves affect you less, I think, is where we want to all get to. Just briefly, just a few sentences about me. I do quite a lot of mentoring of senior managers, providing support and advice. And I suppose my main area is sort of trying to get organizations to change and to grow, and also help develop business plans and strategies. I also work with the Judge Business School on their social venture programs as well, mentor new social ventures. So that's enough about me. So as I said, what we're to look through is having a clear vision, understanding the new environment, what's the business model, what's some tools you can use to look at it and possibly change it. Something about business and financial planning, and as I ended in my intro comments, a bit about technology. So kind of, you know, again, you may have these things and you may be clear about what you're going, but I always think a good starting point is to say, are you clear where you want to be a bit out? So, you know, have you got some view about where you're trying to get to in 5 or 10 years' time? You know, it's a sort of analogy is, you know, you wouldn't start on a journey to France on holiday if you didn't have a route planned. And, you know, that would seem silly, wouldn't it? Just get in the car and head off and sort of not know where the hell you're going. Well, actually, you know, a lot of businesses aren't clear about where they want to be. So, you know, describing that, and actually, if you've already got an idea of what that is, does it need to change? And what I mean by core purpose is kind of what your core DNA is, what you're about, what you're trying to achieve. So, you know, why it's important you exist. And having, you know, before you get into any detail about anything, I think it's really important to be clear about where you're trying to get to. Obviously, as we've been talking, the kind of environment's changed, hasn't it? The opportunity to meet clients or customers is more tricky. The way to communicate with people has changed. The world has moved less to you know, physical shopping to online in a steep increase in online sales, for instance. So, you know, and so the question really is, you know, what's changed in your new environment and what is not likely to go back to how it was? And again, as I said earlier, I think the important thing is clearly it isn't going to go back to how it was anytime soon, and maybe never. And so it's sensible to now think about this new environment and what it might mean for your business. And does that mean there are things you can do that you couldn't do before, or things you can't do anymore, or things that, you know, different, if you're now supporting people, are there different needs, support needs people have? So I think, again, it would be good to think about that and do some analysis of it. And I just throw up a couple of tools just to do that. One is kind of the, you know, the obvious but often missed tool of doing a SWOT analysis. You know, actually just go back. If you've done it before, you could do it again and look at the differences. If you haven't done it before, do it from scratch. If you've got a team, do it with your team. And actually just simply, what are your strengths? What are the weaknesses? What are the opportunities? What are the threats? It's probably an hour's brainstorming, and will give you a clearer idea of things you need to address. You know, a very commonly known tool, but not used as much as I think it probably should be. So that's okay. And then, you know, looking at the bigger picture of the external environment, there's a tool called Steeple, which is basically just analysing those various blue blobs that are on the screen. So actually, you know, what's changed in the economic situation as it affects you? Economic situation has changed for quite a lot of people. You know, is it the ability to be able to afford staff? Is it the effect on income you might get either from customers or funders? How has the environment changed? What's the big or little p political situation as it affects your organization? And you know, things like legal and regulatory stuff, has that changed? In some cases, the regulations have eased up a bit in COVID. Socioeconomic is just really just, you know, the groups of people you deal with and how they are changing and how their needs are changing. So again, it's a sort of brainstorming tool that would allow you to just really try and understand what's going on out there, which we all talk about, but do it in a bit more analytical way. So I'm suggesting for just reflecting on the changes that are going on and just trying to identify where the impact is and what you can do about it. Okay, is everybody okay so far? Business model is really just the way you operate, and there's a tool that some of you may have heard of called the business model canvas that I think is a very good way of describing your business model. Your business model is about what are your products and services, who are the customer segments they relate to, how do you get to those customers, what's the sort of back office stuff, what are the key things you have to do to meet those needs. And that's kind of a business model. And I say I often describe it as the cogs that make the business work. Business model canvas is readily available on the internet. The picture there is it. It's 9 boxes, and just a matter of just printing out a blank one and putting in it each box the relevant information. And what I've written at the top of that is this, if you see the middle box is called the value proposition. Essentially, that's the products or services you are delivering that add value to your customers or clients. So I'm using these words interchangeably because some of you deal with more commercial things, some of you deal with purely beneficiaries or social customers. Then who are the customers at the right hand side? Who are the customer segments that you are working with? So is that, you know, elderly people of you know, in a certain community, or is it certain age groups or certain social segments? And customer relationships and channels is how you relate to them. And I'll show you a quick example of a completely random organization in a minute. The bottom 2 boxes are kind of what's your key income streams. That might be grants, it might be payments by customers or beneficiaries. And what are the sort of key components of cost? Is it buildings, if you have a building, building associated costs? If it's mainly people related, it's obviously staff is going to be a significant thing. The 2 vertical middle boxes in the middle of the left hand side is I can point on this probably. There's key activities and key resources. And key activities are, what are the key things that are important you do? So what are the things that if you didn't do, you wouldn't be providing your business services? And it's probably 2 or 3 things. The bottom part, key resources, is kind of what are the key things you need to have in place? Is it staff? Is it bits of equipment that are particularly important? Is it marketing or media that is particularly important? The word key is critical here. It is oops, sorry. It is the word key means it's not every little resource, but what are the things that are really, must have things. Partners are kind of, as it describes, as who are the people you need to work with but aren't part of your organization. So I don't know, commonly in health settings, the NHS might be a partner, for instance. There's a list of those, what those things are, what each of those boxes are there. There's a load of stuff on this on the internet. It was developed in America by a guy called Alex Osterwalder, and his company is called Strategizer with a Z. And if you go to strategizer.com, you can see articles about it, or if you go on YouTube, you can see lots of quite good examples of how to fill in the business model canvas. And again, if you have a team of people, it's worth doing it collectively. Print out a large sheet, use post-it notes to try and understand what are the key elements of the business and how they work, and particularly at the moment, what's changed. And it may well be things like how you relate to customers, customer relationships and channels on here, this one and this one, may well be things that have changed, as indeed may well be revenue streams. If I take a sort of simple example, it's a commercial example actually, of the London free paper, the Metro, just to sort of illustrate the sort of things that go in the boxes. Apologies for my writing. This is writing on a pencil, so it's but I'll read them out. So for those of you who don't know, the Metro is, as it says, a free paper that's distributed at railway stations in London and the South East, including places like Cambridge. And clearly, it's an unusual business model because the product is free. So kind of their value proposition is really two things. It's a free city paper, because clearly for people who read the paper, that's what it is. But for companies, it's about ad space in a free paper. So there are two distinct products in that case. And there are two distinct customer segments. It's a useful example because it's very clear the two segments are different. So commuters are one customer. They are a customer. They're actually paying nothing, but they are a customer. And advertisers who are paying for adverts in the paper. So the income streams there, if you go to the very bottom, is clearly the paper is free. So all their income streams are actually from advertising fees. And their, let's go up to key activities. So their key activities are write and produce the paper, because they've got to produce a paper that people want to read. It's not exactly highbrow, but they're trying to produce a paper for people to read. And then advertising and distribution are the two other things that are important to them. So, there are only three things that are really key activities for that business. If they get one of those wrong, the business won't work. Likewise, key resources, their key resources are the brand is really important, the distribution networks that they can get to railway stations and tube stations and things, and the logistics, the means of doing that. Again, that doesn't list every possible resource, but it lists the key ones. And if you go to their key partners, probably the key one, for those of you who know the paper, is the public transport network. Because without the public transport network being supportive, they wouldn't have a marketplace for the product in the first place. But they don't, that's not part of their business. There are other organisations like Transport for London and railway companies and things, Network Rail. But they don't own any of those, but they have important relationships with them. So that's kind of a good illustration of the start of the partnerships thing. In terms of costs, they probably have loads of different costs, but the ones that are really important are the ones around content, design and printing, and ad sales. Now, that's a simple example, quite unusual because it's an unusual sort of two product type business, but hopefully that gives you a flavour of it. Okay. Right, I think what I'm going to do is stop at that point and unshare. Oops. Okay. Okay, I'm about halfway through the slides I wanted to do, but I thought I'd stop at that point and sort of put the pictures back on the screen, so to get some thoughts for that. So kind of what I'm saying is that there's a lot of change going on, and it's worth being a bit analytical about what it's doing to you. Does that make sense? Anybody got any comments about that? Everyone's gone quiet. Anybody want to say anything? Yeah, Nikki. Sorry, you're on. Oh.
Yeah, no, I was just unmuted. There's always a little time gap. I'm not that quick at doing it. I mean, what I was thinking when you were talking was, it seems to me it's also about looking at positive impacts and negative impacts.
Absolutely.
And I think it's quite easy to think of everything as a negative impact.
Yeah.
But we did one of our coffee mornings a few weeks ago. We specifically said to people, have there been any positive impacts?
Yeah.
And there were actually quite a lot, and quite
Yes.
a lot of them to do with cost savings because of technology and things like that. So
Yes.
I think that it's very easy to take a sort of everything's awful and we just want it to be back to
Yes.
normal. But
Yes.
thinking that you will be absorbing changes anyway, because
Yeah.
you'd be mad not to.
It's interesting, and we'll talk a bit about technology in the next bit. But actually, I did a limited bit of work by Zoom with a part of Age UK in the Northwest during COVID, and kind of they were an organisation that actually, frankly, did things in quite a basic way. They ran some day centres, they provided some support and training for elderly people, and they had a team of people, and they used email to communicate, and that kind of was it, really. So they would do things like falls prevention training, for instance, quite common in obviously the elderly sector, and they do that by getting people into a building and getting someone to do some training. Now, actually, we talked about sort of all those things, and kind of, well, you can do fall prevention training by making videos. You can make a number of segment videos that actually, and I said, well, that you don't want to make a half-hour video because people just won't watch it. But if you make a 2-minute video about, I don't know, the causes of falls, and then you make another 2-minute video about, the things to do with balance, and you make another 2-minute video about how to get help if you have a fall, and you do another, so you could do like a sort of set of videos, all of which are quite short. And the beauty about that is that you can take a bit of time getting that training right, making sure you've covered everything, making sure that it's done in a clear, easy way for people to sort of, access, which might actually be better than random bits of training that are delivered by different people in different ways at different times. So actually you can get consistency, you save time, you also don't have to get elderly people, out to go out for a half-hour falls training session. I mean, obviously I accept there's the social benefit of that as well, but fundamentally you can. So that's a good example of changing the business. Their model was, actually, we do training, people come in on a Tuesday morning for 10 to 11 and that's what we do. Actually, they don't have to do that. And also they had because their staff were pretty disparate, they had people in day centres, people providing help from home on phone lines, and all, so it didn't have any really easy way of communicating. And so there are tools that you can use. And my mantra with technology is just use off-the-shelf tools. Use tools you can get apps for your phone, or and there are ones like the things like Slack is a good example of one that's a good messaging tool. There are others. There's Microsoft Teams. There's a few others around. But if you've got a smallish team and you want to simplify communications, the advantage of those sort of things like Slack is that you can have focused discussions on topics without just getting buried in email. and that just makes life a bit easier. And you can, it's a sort of cross between a text messaging and an email system in a nutshell. But you have discussions in distinct discussion forums. So, if somebody wanted to talk about the day centres, they could have a forum on day centres and discuss things that way. So there are all sorts of tools. I mean, another example would be, I'm getting ahead of my presentation, but that kind of doesn't matter, is if you're trying to manage several people, doing projects, doing pieces of work, I think that's probably something generally that is a bit more complex when you're all working remotely, because you're not getting together for a meeting and saying, well, how's this going? How's that going? You can use Zoom calls to do that. Of course you can, but it's perhaps a bit more complicated. So, why not use some bit of software that can allow you to keep track of tasks and projects? Now, again, there are a million of them. If you type it into the App Store or the Android store, you'll find a myriad of them. But one I would suggest at least worth looking at is something like Trello. Actually allows you on a simple sort of card, almost like a card index basis, to keep track of projects and tasks, but also to then share those with other people so that people can keep track of progress and add progress and comments and things to those tasks. So again, you've got a means of sort of structuring information flow, which is probably one of the hardest things in the current environment. But certainly I very much agree with Nikki's point that there are, just the very nature of having to rethink things, there are opportunities to do things better, smarter, cleverer, as well as the risks of having to cut back staff and have other sort of things like that. So somebody's just mentioned a brainstorming tool. Who was that? What was that you were mentioning? Do you want to share us about that?
Hi, yes, I'm Karina. I've just chaired MindMeister. Don't know if any of you have tried it.
Is it like a mind map?
It's a digital mind map.
Yeah.
Which I find I'm doing a piece of work at the moment with a charity, and we started right at the beginning, more or less, of lockdown as well, and all of a sudden had to kind of try to look at digital tools, how we can work together. And also because it's an arts charity, they're very, very visual people, so we needed something very visual. And yes, it's basically a mind mapping tool that you can just throw your ideas on there, your relationships with them, but you can also, even I'm just using the free version at the moment, you can link another tool that's called Meister Task to it, and you can actually assign tasks to individual people, and they get a notification, and you can kind of communicate, if you like, a little bit within as well. It's obviously not quite as kind of sleek or like Slack or quick in communications, but it's quite good if you're working on certain elements, especially if you're looking at kind of business planning again. If you're looking at the business model Canva, you could almost stretch it out and do all your thinking. You
do that there. Again, there are lots of other versions of that. There's I use one called MindNode, but there are lots of them. The other thing is you can use the whiteboard facility in Zoom, and indeed you can I don't know, put up the business model canvas and get people to draw on it, things like that. I'm lucky because I've got an iPad with a pencil, which is great in these times. So again, I can, if I'm discussing something, that I put up a blank page of something, or an app or a notebook or something, and I can write on it and things, or I can, look at a spreadsheet and draw rings around numbers or something, so there are all sorts of tools to do that. But yeah, tools where you can share ideas, because I think that's probably one of the things that's sort of more difficult when you're away from being able to get together in a room. If you get together in a room, you can stick up big sheets of paper on the wall and get people to contribute ideas. trying to do this digitally is a bit more of a challenge, I think. But as everybody suggested, somebody mentioned a Google top product. Then what was that? Somebody mentioned Google Jamboard.
Yeah, we use Jamboards quite a lot actually.
Yeah.
We've actually at PwC, obviously it's a rather large business, so we do have lots of things at our disposal. But we do use Google Hangouts, we use Google Jamboards, we use Slido, we use all sorts of things, live stream. And the Jamboards actually work quite well. You can go into a main room, you can go off into other rooms, you can do Jamboards. It's quite a nice way if you're broadcasting to people to get them to actually input. It's quite nice.
Yeah, thanks, Liz. I think one of the things is a bit more, it's kind of easier for you in a big organisation because you can all use the same tools and then you all know what they. I think one of the things that's a bit more difficult with small organisations is they might be familiar with, you know, one set of tools, and an organisation they want to work with is not familiar with that lot of tools, but familiar with something else. So I think that's often a problem. And, you know, depending upon whether you're a Google person or an Apple person or a, you know, Microsoft person or whatever, people tend to have their favourite things.
And actually, not all of our clients are able to use Google. So, albeit it's an international example, a number of our Asian clients are not able to use Google.
Yeah.
You have to use WebEx and some of the more standard things. Zoom, we use Zoom as well. We've found some ways of doing things a bit differently than we had done previously. We're certainly on a learning curve. We still have the age-old thing of you're on mute, you're not showing your screen. All the
no, well, it wouldn't be the same if that didn't happen, would it? Nikki.
I mean, but I think part of the issue for me is, I mean, we've always sort of looked at social enterprises and said, well, how many of them are actually using this technology? How many people would we exclude if we used one of these media? Yes. But one of the most interesting experiences I've had has been that I work with a lot of organisations who have boards of predominantly older and much less technological savvy people. Yes. And surprise, surprise, they are now Zoom calling. I think it's partly because they've had the motivation to do it so they can talk to their grandchildren. But I think at the same time, you have to be quite careful with bombarding them with all the technology that you could use. Yes. Because sometimes once you've got them on a Zoom call, that's enough.
Yes. No, you make a good point, Nikki. And clearly, you know, if you're going to move some services from being physical to online, and particularly if it's for people with disability or elderly or whatever, then clearly you've got to think through that. Although I think, you know, your point also well made that, you know, it's surprising people are finding that they can use some of these things that previously.
It's been amazing. I've had absolutely fully signed up technophobes propped in front of their wife's tablet and told not to touch anything, but still participating in a Zoom call. And I never would have predicted that. And I think I think they've understood now how the technology can create much greater access for them, because they had a big national conference that was done online. And rather than trying to persuade them to go to London for a couple of days and do an overnight stay and do all of the stuff that they're really reluctant to do, they could just log into a Zoom call for an hour and go to a workshop and then carry on and do other things. It's been fantastic.
Yeah. Before we started the call, Jane and I were talking, and Jane was saying that, you know, some of the you know, webinars they've done have been better attended than some physical previous things. And again, it's because, you know, well, I can sign up to a webinar and I can turn up for an hour in my bedroom or wherever, and that's it. But I haven't got to go and, you know, drive half an hour, get into traffic, find somewhere to park, get back afterwards, and waste a half day for an hour's meeting. So, you know, there are plus points, but I think you're making a good point by saying you need to think about who either the users of your services or products, what ability they have to use these things, if that's what you're going to try and move to. But I think equally don't presume that they can't move to that sort of thing. And people also, elderly people, for instance, the Age UK one I was talking about, recognise that as a problem with getting to people, but they found that quite a lot of family and friends would happily support elderly people using the technology. So, so don't presume it can't happen, but it's obviously right to think about the options.
But I think the new, going to say the new business opportunity is trying to get some of those people connected, because now we know that older people and some of those people who we always said, no, you can't use technology because you will, they won't have access. I think we've realised that they now can, but some of them actually physically don't. They don't have Wi-Fi. They don't have any kit that they can use, or if they do, it's so old and cranky that it's not working.
And as you say, that is a sort of social enterprise opportunity,
absolutely.
Isn't it? And the cost of for instance a basic iPad these days is not expensive in the scheme of things, and is probably the easiest thing to use. And it might well be a good opportunity for someone to do some sort of setting up of iPads with basic products on them and basic training about it. And probably they need 4 icons on the screen, like Zoom, text messages, I don't know, and the internet or something, whatever. But that is a real opportunity, isn't it? And isolation is one of the problems of this last few months. So trying to recognise and deal with that is a really good idea. But again, it's I think the big message I got is just this period of change is forcing everybody to think about things differently. And people like me who do consultancy would often say you should do that anyway. The beauty about now, if there is a beauty about now, is that actually people are recognizing they need to. And so kind of that prod is a real opportunity to think through radically things different. Yeah. So that's the message. I think what I'll do is I'll whiz through. I've got a few slides, some of which are on the technology we just talked about, but I'll just whiz through those and then come back for a discussion. Is that okay? Won't be a sec. Oops. Okay. So I think the couple of areas I just want to sort of pick up on at the end is things around finance. I mean, clearly again, the same mantra applies, is what can you do differently? Is clearly lots of businesses are struggling getting income or funding and being able to deliver things at the level they could before for a variety of reasons, from clients not appearing to difficulty of getting to them, whatever. And I suppose again, it's the same message: is can you look at your budget, business plan, financial plan, and say, actually, can we reset that? And again, ask the fundamental questions. What can you do differently? Just because you've done it always this way, what can you do differently? Can you reduce or eliminate costs? Are there costs that you've regarded as are there every year, just because they are? And can you reduce or eliminate them? I mean, obviously, lots of companies are looking at things like office costs at the moment. Do you need the scale of office costs you've got? Because have you now realised that people can happily work remotely? In which case, do you need a permanent office? Could you rent meeting space when you need meetings? Those are sort of examples. There maybe will be many more. I think the other thing that's important to do is just, I don't know whether you all do things like keep a risk register, but actually kind of reviewing the risks that to the business now. What has changed? If you've got a risk register, review each risk. If you haven't, this is a good opportunity to create a simple risk register of your top business risks. So just a couple of comments to throw in. Cash flow is obviously a key financial thing for most businesses, particularly at a time when projections of cash are not as predictable. And kind of the common sense thing here is monitor it and project cash flow on a sort of weekly, monthly basis, depending on your sort of business. And again, look at things, you know, can you defer paying money out? You know, is there money out you can defer paying? Can you reduce costs? Because that will improve your cash flow. Can you, if you're someone who invoices someone, can you invoice them promptly? Are there funding opportunities? Can you get regular payments from people if you're providing regular services automatically by a sort of direct credit, the sort of direct debit version for income? You know, are people who are funding you paying you money at the right time, and can you chase that up? So obviously anything that you can reduce cash out and improve cash in is a good thing. Risks register, for those of you who aren't familiar with them, is about what risks do you have and how likely they're to happen and what impact they'd have if they happened. And basically, this is a one-page simple guide of doing that, which is to identify the risks you think could happen to your business, like, I don't know, not getting enough customers, to so bad publicity, to, you know, any risk you can think of, be they physical or not. And just try and put a score on the impact and likelihood and multiply that together to get a sort of index of gross risk. So you'll get those that rank from sort of 1 to 25 by the time you've done that, from multiplying 1 to 5 by 1 to 5. And the answer is to then look at those risks and say, okay, what action could I take to reduce that risk? Can I take action to reduce that risk? Is that risk something I could completely avoid because I don't need to do that activity? Or is it something that is an ongoing risk and I need to plan for it and plan how to deal with it? Broadly, those are the things that you can do with risks. The other thing you can do with the risk is transfer it, which is typically by sort of insuring against it happening. But if you haven't got a risk register, then a quick bit of brainstorming around what are the key risks, particularly at the moment as the world has changed and quite a lot has changed. What are the risks as they are now? My guess is a risk register you had 2 years ago probably is quite a lot away from reality at the moment. Okay, technology we started talking about a bit. I kind of think it's around those sorts of things. It's around, you know, can I use technology to simplify communication? Obviously, could you do e-commerce if you don't, or more of it if you do less of it? Can you deliver products and services electronically? My example of videos for things, maybe. Is there services you can deliver all or part of that way? Can you simplify your back office type functions, be that accounting, IT, whatever? Again, the same mantra is just look at it afresh and say, okay, forget what we're doing now. What could we possibly be doing? What might be different? What could be different? You guys have mentioned examples. I've just put a few up there. I think most of those have been mentioned, but, you know, kind of, we all know we're using video conferencing now. There are several other versions of them. We mentioned Slack or MS Teams, and people have mentioned other things. Do YouTube videos for training, either for customers or staff. Use collaborative file sharing. I mean, particularly useful for small organizations where you can store files in one cloud base and share access as appropriate. Convert documents to e-documents, become paperless, scan documents so that they're all available to people who need them. Put things like policies, operating practices, how to manage tasks, how to undertake certain tasks, put them standard operating practices in folders. Again, the beauty is no paper, you can work from anywhere, anybody can access it if you've given them permission to. use some sort of customer relationship management tool to manage customer client contacts. That's just as important in social business as it is in commercial businesses, which is about who your clients are, what interactions you're having with them. And again, if you're using several staff people working at home, to be able to share client contact information makes your organization appear to be on the sort of one page. Task managers, Trello was one I mentioned simply because it's not actually with the one I use myself, but it's a very simple graphical one for people who like graphical type interaction. It's not lots of complicated lists. My other mantra is use off-the-shelf tools. Don't go trying to say, you know, well, I need some special task manager, I need to get it built from scratch. Just use something that's readily available. Okay, so I'm going to put the screen back off in a second, just to say you've got my details on this slide pack if you need to get in touch. So hopefully that's a whistle-stop tour around some things to think about. Apologies for whizzing through that fast, because you could have happily done 2 hours on business model canvas quite easily, or more. What I hope is it stimulates you to think about things differently, and to think about, try some of those tools for looking at the environment, print off a copy of the business model canvas and plot what your business looks like now, and then say to yourself, should it change? Which are the bits that might change? Think about the financial plan, if you have one, or a budget, or whatever financial sort of projections you have, and go back to, you know, what should I do? You know, what should change? And I really seriously look at costs that you have incurred forever and say, does this need to be there? You know, why do we rent this space? Why have we got this lease on this photocopier? Why have we got this coffee machine that we pay so much per month? You know, whatever it is, you know, just go, you know, it's often called PwC, we know it's often called zero-based budgeting, which is actually sort of, rather than sort of take what was and just, you know, add 10% to it, which is, you know, a common way of doing these things, go back and say, start with zero and say, what costs do we need to incur and why, and are they essential? But the real thing is, this is an opportunity. Please see this as an opportunity. The world's different, but the world's going on, and it's gradually getting back to some sort of normality, and it's an opportunity to possibly, you know, make a big step change forward. And you know, I think that's the way to think about it. So it's the glass half full concept rather than the glass half empty. Right. Any further questions? Nobody's sort of looking very panicky, which is a good sign. Does that make sense? Does anything you want to talk about? Does anybody think I've talked a load of rubbish? Probably.
That was really good, Neil. Thank you. Has anyone got any questions? Or
I just felt it was very useful. I made a note of some of the tools, and it is also that going back to basics, the SWOT and the steeple.
Yeah, it is.
Just revisiting all of that. It's going back to school, but you sort of said, it is a glass half full, not half empty, and it's taking this as an opportunity, isn't it? So
yeah. I think it is, as the title of the seminar is, it's resetting. It's sort of saying, let's go through all these things, some of which you may have done before, some of which are sort of, you know, in a dusty drawer somewhere from 5 years ago. But if ever there's a time to rethink those things, it's now. You know, you can't have a more perfect opportunity to argue that you should go back and do all those things. And none of them need to take long. You know, the environment stuff, a couple of hours Zoom whiteboarding type thing with people in the organisation or people who know the organisation to get everybody's ideas and then just collate it and simplify it. It shouldn't take much longer than that. I'm not asking you to spend, you know, weeks and weeks on this stuff. I'm thinking,
you can't, you haven't got time.
Precisely. Mm.
And I like the thought of the risk register. I think we do need to start looking at that as a company. We're kind of we're numb, if that makes sense. We've coped in crisis, and we're turning towards this second phase new norm. But actually, we've also got to kind of have some reality, because you're kind of hoping it'll all be over, and by Christmas we can get back to normal.
If you think about it, a key role of trustees or board members, about what sort of structure you are, is about governance. And a key part of governance is internal control, and a key part of internal control is risk management. And, you know, whether you're a little organization or you're, you know, Ford or something, you know, boards, you know, do and should look at risk registers and, you know, what's changed and what's coming along on the horizon. You know, unfortunately, the world is littered with big companies whose risk registers have not lived up to what they should have done, and you know, they've been.
You do wonder how many companies had global pandemic on their risk register 6 months ago.
Well, it's funny when one of the roles I had in the past was a director of UK Sports, the government's elite sport agency, and that was back in sort of the late 80s, early 90s, and then the whole conversation was about avian flu, and every organisation, and certainly every public sector organisation, had to have a avian flu plan, you know, of what you do if avian flu arrives. The curious thing about that is, because I was part of doing it, is none of that reflected the sort of issues we've come up with now, which is the contagious. But essentially, all those plans were about people dropping dead with flu or being seriously ill, and how you'd cope with less people. They weren't about, you couldn't talk to people, you couldn't meet with people, you couldn't, you know, nobody saw the sort of contagious bit of that anyway, which, you know, proves the point, doesn't it, that you have to be on these things. Now, you know, going forward, nobody's ever going to put a sort of how we deal with this sort of thing without recognizing the issues of contagiousness and, you know, isolation and stuff like that. But you know, you don't know what you don't know. The world famous comment by Donald Rumsfeld, you know, is one of the challenges in risk registers is thinking of risks that you don't know what they are. So again, the best way of doing it is to do it with a group of people and, you know, share it around and get people to criticize and add to it. But then trustees should at board meetings review the risk register with the senior management. That is a key part of their job.
I said to a client last week, "Oh, well done, you've got to the stage of having known unknowns."
Quite. It is.
Can I just say the other thing that crosses my mind looking at the canvas thing is, well, it's partly in the centre of it, you've got the value statement. And I think for a lot of social enterprises, that's going to be really important. And it's important to recognise that if things are important to you and reflect your values, nobody is saying that you should stop doing them.
Yes.
But sometimes those are the things that are really hard to do at the moment. So it's really important to work out how else you do it.
Yes.
The other thing is the impact stuff and knowing, having the evidence base to know where you're having your greatest impact and using that to help influence your decision making.
Yes. On the business model canvas, I think the thing with the business model canvas, we use it at the Judge Business School quite a lot, and it's one of those tools that is easy to sort of at first sight because it's just a few simple boxes. Once you start filling it in, usually your usual feeling is it's a bit more tricky to fill in than you thought. So don't be afraid of that and afraid of playing around with it and changing it. So I'd certainly recommend look for Strategizer, the company, because they do charge quite a lot for some advice and services, but there are some free stuff on their website as well. But also there is one or more videos by Alex Osterwalder, the guy who invented it, on YouTube. So those are worth looking at. And the other thing to say is there are odd people, I think they are odd people, that try and muck around with the business model canvas to come up with different versions of it. And the most notorious of those are those in the sort of third sector, where they think, you know, that an ordinary business model canvas isn't sufficient and you have to have a special one. My advice is don't go anywhere near that. Stick with the standard business model canvas. That is all you need. And lots of people play around with the boxes and you find that they've crossed one box out and made it something else. And I just don't go near it. Stick with the basics. And say, look for advice. Say if anyone gets stuck on anything, wants to drop me a line, that's fine. You know, happy to help.
Corinna wants to ask a question.
Corinna.
I would just ask or add to the business model canvas. I do agree with you that the simpler the better. But for social enterprises, I think what often is important for them as well, what's the social value?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I think,
and kind of integrating that in the canvas, I think it's quite important. And sometimes the confusion between beneficiaries and customers is one.
Yes, that's a good point. I think, again, the thing to say with the business model canvas, it isn't everything. It doesn't answer any, you know, if you're preparing a business plan, for instance, you'd probably put stuff on around the markets and the competition, wouldn't you? Probably most businesses. You'll note there is nothing about that in the business model canvas. So this is purely about how the model works. And the other thing is to bear in mind that the customers in the context of the business model canvas are people that give you money. So they could be clients who pay something. It could be, for instance, a local authority that pays you for doing something, or it could be somebody who gives you grants. So it's people that pay money to you.
But I thought that was why it was such an interesting model to use, because the free paper does exactly that. You've got income coming in from advertisers, and the beneficiaries are the people who are reading the paper.
Exactly.
So it's just thinking about it in that way.
And that's why I chose that model, because I thought whilst it was a commercial one, it had a quasi sort of social type element to it. But say, I would stress the best thing to do if you can is print it on A3 and get the little postage stamp type post-it notes and use those to plot things. The other things you can do, I've seen people do quite often, is use if there's perhaps different customer segments and you've got a slightly different product, is use different color post-it notes for different segments. But again, it's a brainstorming tool, and it's trying to say, does the model work? You know, if we're going to provide this service to these channels, to these customers, are we getting to them the right way, or should we be looking at another way of getting to them? Are the key costs and key resources we need to do that right, or have we got it wrong, or if there's something we're assuming is a key cost but it's not? You know, who are the partners? Are they the right ones, or are there other partners should we explore? So use it as an opportunity to reset. Okay.
Right. Thank you. Any other questions before we finish up? No. Well, huge thank you, Neil. That was really, really useful.
Thank you very much.
I've recorded this,
Thank you.
and I'll put it on our website. And I'll also send around Neil's details afterwards in case anybody wanted to talk to him.
Yeah, and it's also on the end of the slides as well. If you send the
will you send the slides out?
Yeah.
I've sent Jane a PDF copy of them, and say it's got my contact details on it. So
great, thank you, fabulous.
Okay,
thank you very much.
Nice to talk to you all. Thank you for your contributions.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
Bye.